Good evening. I would like to call to order the August 9, 2021 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that all board members except Chris Carlson are present, and Mr. Carlson is absent and excused. It was announced that all school districts may begin to hold in-person open public meetings. However, attendees no longer need to pre-register to attend a study session. But all attendees must wear a mask or face covering to all board meetings, study sessions, or special board meetings. Board meetings, study sessions, and special board meetings will continue to be live streamed and viewable on the district's website. If you are unable to live stream the meeting, you can call 425-936-2813, conference ID 37127 to listen to the meeting. The first and only topic for tonight's study session is bond and levy planning. Dr. Holman, you get it started.
Yes, thank you. So excited to be back with the board to continue the discussion around our funding measures. The board has asked a number of questions, so we have this evening planned, but we also are scheduling a bit of an extended study session on August 23rd to continue to dig into recommendations and information. Additionally, we have some information that we'll provide in writing to the board based on some of your questions. And so tonight we have two outcomes that we want to achieve. First is presentation and review of community survey information. Want the board to receive that, hear that, and be able to ask questions about it. And then also reviewing our timelines and next steps related to bond and levy planning. So with that, I'll hand it over to Barbara Posthumus to introduce our guest this evening.
Great. Well, we have Ben Winston from Strategies 360 with us. He's the research director. Strategies 360, we have the district has engaged them multiple times to do public polling surveys for the district, and so Ben is here to share. They did a survey for us in July. And so Ben is here to share the results of that survey and go through that. Then are they going to be able to see Ben?
Nope,
or
they
no?
will not. They will hear
Okay,
Ben now as he unmutes and presents. And Ben,
Great.
Just whenever you're ready for a new slide, if I haven't moved forward, just say next slide and I'll move it forward for you.
Sounds good. Will do. Thank you for the introduction and nice to meet you all. I'm sorry you can't see my brilliant smiling face, but I will try to cover the results of our latest community survey on behalf of the school district in about 20-25 minutes or so. I'm happy to take any questions from you all about the survey or about the findings within it. So we can move forward and continue. One more and one more. All right, so we conducted the survey in mid to late July, about 2 weeks ago now. And the important thing I want to note here is that we conducted this survey among all adult residents, or a representative sample of all adult residents across Lake Washington School District. So this was not a survey of voters, any voter universe. This was not a survey of just parents of students in the school district. This was a survey of all adults in the community, a representative survey of all adults in the community. We reached people online, by mobile phone, and by landline with live interviews, and we did 401 interviews in total. We can go forward, and one more. So the first thing I want to cover today is the community's perceptions of Lake Washington School District, and this was one of the main priorities of the survey, getting this information about perceptions of this. And one important data points within that section was about satisfaction with the district. So we asked people whether they're satisfied with the quality of education in Lake Washington School District. We asked the same question in a similar survey back in 2014. And as you can see on the screen, first of all, overall, residents are very satisfied with the quality of schools in Lake Washington School District. 71% say they're satisfied, just 17% say they're dissatisfied. Also, importantly, satisfaction levels have increased 11% since 2014. So that's a pretty significant improvement and a bump up, and something the district should be very proud of. We can move forward. I also think it's important to note demographically where these changes have occurred over the past 7 years. across the community, basically every demographic is very satisfied with the schools: men and women, young residents and older residents, white residents and residents of color, parents and non-parents, and in every region of the district. But parents have always been very satisfied, or I should say, since 2014, have been very satisfied with the district. What's changed since 2014? Perceptions among non-parents, that is, people who do not have children or grandchildren who are students at schools in the district. They went from 52% satisfied 7 years ago to 66% satisfied today, and that's a pretty impressive movement over the past 7 years. Next slide. We also asked about the district's response to COVID. We asked specifically, COVID-19 has deeply affected our community along with many other places. From what you know, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way Lake Washington School District has responded to COVID-19? What we find is a very big difference between non-parents and parents. Parents are fairly 45% are satisfied, 20% dissatisfied, and over a third say they're not sure, which makes sense, right? They're not getting, most non-parents are not hearing as much information about schools. However, parents, 68% are satisfied, just 30% dissatisfied. Very few numbers, over 2-to-1 ratio or margin of positive to negative. So on the whole, while there may be quite a vocal minority of parents who are upset with the school district for one reason or another related to COVID, on the whole, the wide majority of parents and non-parents, the plurality of non-parents, are satisfied with how the district has handled COVID over the past year or two. Next slide. We asked the district's performance on a range of other metrics as well, from maintaining school buildings, facilities, to technology, to teaching, to communication. On almost every metric, the district is getting very strong ratings, and we do surveys like this in many districts across the state. These are some of the strongest we've seen. 71% say the district does an excellent or good job maintaining buildings and facilities. Overall performance is at 69% positive, up-to-date technology, 61% positive. And at the same time, you're seeing the proportion who say the district's doing a poor job. The red number is very small, 4 or 5%, even on some of the lower ones. It's a very minimal proportion of people who think the district is doing a poor job. There are some people who don't know, who say they're unsure, up to 20, even 22%, who can't really rate the district on one metric or another. But overall, these ratings are very strong, up and down the board. I will note down at the bottom of the last one, preparing for future growth of the student population. We've done a lot of polling in Lake Washington School District over the years, and this has consistently been a strong concern, especially among parents who are concerned about the growth of the student population and overcrowding over the years. So clearly, we see when it comes to things like maintaining buildings and facilities, people are very pleased with the district. When it comes to things like preparing for growth of the student population, ratings are a bit more mixed on that metric. And next. We asked some of these same questions, the district's performance in 2014, and some of them are worded a little bit differently, but they're basically the same concepts. And what we see is across the board, again, improvements from between 5 to 10 points on every metric compared to last time, including communicating with parents, community, class sizes, high quality teachers, and again, buildings and facilities. Next. When we look specifically among parents who are more likely to be able to rate the district on these metrics, again, we are seeing very, very strong ratings across the board. On maintaining school buildings and facilities, 80% of parents say the district does a good or excellent job. Overall performance of schools, 77% say the district does a good job. These numbers are very, very good, up and down. Now, again, at the bottom, we see a little bit softer numbers on preparing for future growth of the student population, on managing and spending taxpayer dollars, and also on class sizes. These numbers aren't bad by any stretch of the imagination. On class sizes, for example, 50% positive, just 14% negative, but they're a little bit softer than some of the ratings, and you're seeing a lot more people saying the district's doing a good job rather than excellent job. So a little bit of room for improvement there. We know that's always been a concern in the district, and that remains the case today. Next. A few demographic notes. We don't have to go into all the details on this one, but what I want to point out is this number 2 shown on the screen here. Residents of color are giving the district equal ratings or even higher ratings than white residents across the board on all of the metrics we just talked about, including being 11 points or 11 points more, saying the district is doing an excellent or good job on communicating with the district. Now, that's not a typical pattern. In many other districts or state, we're seeing the opposite. In fact, that districts are having are finding it challenging to reach communities of color. What we're seeing in Lake Washington School District is that residents of color are hearing from the school district and rating them very highly on most metrics. On the flip side, I would also note, I was going to note one more thing on that last slide. Residents in lower income households, however, are giving the district lower ratings on several different metrics, including teaching quality, communication, class sizes, and future population growth. So it's something to keep an eye on there. Next. In terms of, we asked an open-ended question. This is just generally, what are the biggest issues facing schools in Lake Washington School District? And the big thing we've been watching for here over the past year or two in asking this question is the proportion of people who pick COVID, right? Now, 2 years ago, no one was saying COVID or, remote learning was an issue, distance learning was an issue. Then over the past year, that became the dominant issue. 60, 70% of people saying that was the biggest challenge facing schools, obviously. Now that has receded a bit. So, that is still quite a big challenge. And people are still bringing it up as something that is, top of mind for them when about schools. But it's not quite as dominant a concern as it was, say, 6 months ago in other similar districts. I would also mention class sizes, overcrowding, population growth coming through. 13% of people picked up on that. Again, that's a persistent concern in the district. And then the third category we have here, 11% mentioned something about politicizing education or critical theory or something kind of in that. To be clear, people didn't use these exact terms. These are sort of catch-all categories for responses that mentioned these themes. So it's not that 11% of people mentioned the term critical race theory, but we did pick up on a minority, but a vocal minority of residents mentioning something about politicizing education, race in schools, things like that. Next. And one more. So we asked residents about their perception of need for funding in Lake Washington schools. In other words, do people think that Lake Washington School District has enough funding or do they need additional funding? What we find is that a majority, 51%, think Lake Washington School District needs additional funding. Of those, 19% say the district definitely needs additional funding. 36% say the district has sufficient or has too much. Now, this is over 50%. So there's some recognition of the need for funding here. But I would describe this a little bit softer as being a little bit softer than we've seen in some other places in terms of the perception of the need for funding. We see it is a little bit higher among men, among parents, both at 54%, and among higher income households. But among other demographics, including women, including lower income households, there isn't quite as strong a perception of the need for school funding. Next. I'd also want to mention how this compares to 2014, right? This is a very different environment for a number of reasons. But when we asked the same question in 2014, we had 57% of residents see a need for more school funding and 33 who did not. This year it's at 51-36, so a little bit narrower, a little bit softer than it was in 2014. Now, one reason why residents may have some concerns about additional funding for schools may have to do with tax sensitivity, in that if they think their taxes are far too high, they may be wary of any suggestions of additional school funding relating that to their property taxes. What we find is just a little under half, 45% of residents think their property taxes for education or for the quality of public schools services in their community are too high. About an equal proportion, 41%, say their taxes are about right. No one is ever going to say their taxes are too low, myself included. But what we look to see here is, is there a really, really strong majority of people think their taxes are too high? That could have implications for thinking about a bond or levy passage. But in this case, we're seeing not super strong tax sensitivity. This is within the usual range, I would say, for the area. And next. When we think specifically about the levies themselves, what we did is we asked residents about what their priorities were for funding within the levies. This, of course, does not dictate goes in the levies or where the money in the levies might go to, but it can be helpful in thinking about the types of things within the levies to emphasize or that resonate most with the community, the types of things that are people's top priorities. When it comes to the EP&O levy, school staff, nurses, counselors, mental health supports really popped. That was something that the community prioritizes very highly and thinks is very important. 20% said it was a top priority. 72% overall said it was a high or top priority. Support for programs such as special ed, ELL, highly capable learning programs also resonated very strongly. Training and professional learning for staff was a little bit low, and then athletics and extracurricular activities for students was certainly a lower priority for levy funds than some of the other topics we mentioned. Not that people don't think this is important, but when it comes to thinking about where levy dollars could go, this was certainly a lower priority. And next. A quick demographic differences I wanted to point out. When it came to the staff, nursing, mental health supports, that was more of a top priority for women than it was for men. It was more of a top priority for those without a college degree than those with, and it was more of a top priority for lower income households than those in higher income households. Next. When it came to the professional learning and training staff, this was more important for residents of color than white residents. This was more important for parents, perhaps not surprisingly, than non-parents, and far more important for lower income households than those in higher income households, which may not come as a surprise in that we saw that lower income households were more likely to rate the quality of teaching in their neighborhood schools as lower than those in higher income households. And next. We also asked about a capital levy, and again, provided a few different places where that funding could go to see what people thought was a priority for them. Classroom tech and computers for students and staff really popped here as being a top priority, as did safety and security upgrades in school buildings. Making physical repairs in mechanical systems and updating mechanical systems to maintain school buildings, HVAC and the like. That was also a high priority, though as you'll see, the intensity behind it, the proportion who said top priority was not quite as high as some of the others. And then again, upgrading and maintaining athletic fields, stadiums, and outdoor play spaces, a bit to the bottom of the list. And again, not that people don't think it's important, but just that it wasn't as high of a priority for capital levy dollars as some of these other issues. Next. When it came to those safety and security upgrades, we see this frequently, so this is not unique to Lake Washington School District, but we see that that's more important for parents, more important for those without a college degree, and more important for older residents, safety and security. And next. So a couple final things to cover. We asked very directly whether residents would prefer, if they had to pick, if we forced them to choose, would they rather funding go towards hiring teachers and staff, high quality teachers and staff, or towards improving school facilities? The answer is very clear. As you can see on the left, a majority prefer money go towards teachers and staff. Just 5% say the money should go more towards school facilities. Obviously, people would love to have both. This doesn't really surprise us given some of the earlier metrics we showed earlier. You know, people think that school buildings and facilities are generally in good shape already. And not that people have concerns about the quality of teaching and staff, but this is an overwhelming top priority for many residents of the district, even if it is already good, to continue improving that. So not a surprise to see that basically every part of the community demographically is more in favor of teachers and staff than school building maintenance. Next. We also asked, when it comes to student growth, what would be the best way to address the increase in students? Would it be, and what you see basically is that people prefer to build additions onto existing schools, to rebuild aging schools, to build new school buildings and add portables, and not to make class sizes larger. But the differentiation here between these different options we thought was pretty clear. It seems that the community's priority is again to build additions onto existing buildings and to rebuild schools where possible. This won't be possible everywhere, and that is up to the board and to others of the district, on what is feasible and what makes the most sense. And in some cases, these obviously may not make the most sense. But as a general concept, residents' priorities here are to build additions and to rebuild when possible. Next. And next. So we presented some information to residents, about or framing the need for funding in the district. And the question was, which of these different statements resonated the most among the community? Of them, which of these did people find convincing or compelling good reasons to see the need for more school funding? We tested 5 different statements here. The first one, which we call entire district, I'm going to read because it is the one that generally tested the best. All of these tested well. I'm going to get to that in a minute, the data behind that, but the one that tested the best reads as follows. All Lake Washington students to be given the same opportunities regardless of their abilities, backgrounds, or family's income. These measures would help make improvements at schools across the entire district, making sure all students in our district have equitable opportunities, academic support, and technology. And you can see why that type of message is compelling for people, right? It is very inclusive. It addresses sharing resources and providing resources to the entire district, and the benefits of what these students would get, what all students would get with levies passing or with additional funding. The other message that I want to point out here is the one on cuts, because this is a bit of a different framing to talking about the same thing. And that is, without these levies, here's what the district would lose. It would face a funding gap and be forced to make budget cuts in many areas, including cutting the number of teachers, nurses, and mental health counselors, reducing bus service, and being unable to update textbooks and instructional materials. So a different tack, a different approach to talking about the same thing. We find both of these to be successful, the sort of benefits framing and the cuts framing. They can be used with different audiences or different targets, but people are finding both of these messages, well, really all of these messages to resonate deeply in terms of increasing the recognition of the need for funding in the district. Next. So here's the data behind this. Again, the big takeaway here is that any of these statements, all of these statements, residents find very compelling, find very convincing. Up to 30 to 30% saying they're very convincing reasons to increase funding for Lake Washington School District, 60 to 70% saying they're at least somewhat or very convincing reasons to increase funding. Not a ton of differentiation between the 5 messages, but they all do very well. And next. So after presenting information to residents, we ask them again, which of the following best describes your opinion about education funding? Does the district need additional funding, or do they have enough? And we see quite a substantial increase in the perception need for funding. It goes from 51% to 61%. The people who think, the proportion who think that the schools have enough money drops a few points from 36 to 32. One thing we like to see is an increase in the dark blue number. That is the people who say schools definitely need additional funding. And in this case, it doesn't actually change. It starts at 19, it ends at 19. So basically what we're seeing is an increase in the proportion of people who say schools probably need additional funding, which is helpful when thinking about a bond or levy, but it is not kind of the firmer, more intense, harder support that often relates more to vote choice. Next. We don't have to spend a lot of time here. I know this is a lot of numbers in a table, but basically wanted to point out that the shifts after hearing information to seeing the need for funding more than earlier come disproportionately among parents, disproportionately in Redmond, and among residents of color as well. Next. Again, we don't need to go through all the information on this table. This is just talking about different demographic breakdowns within that messaging or that information. What I want to do is focus on the third one, and that is the difference between what parents and non-parents respond to. Generally, they're responding to the same information. The equity message, or the entire district message I mentioned before, the message about cuts that I mentioned before, the technology message works well. But parents are also rating the message about growth highly than non-parents. And that message about growth focuses on preparing the district for future population growth and making sure, this funding going towards making sure the district is prepared to accommodate more students and reduce overcrowding. Non-parents, that, wasn't as relevant to, given that they aren't as connected to the school district, but for parents found that very compelling, and that was also one of the top messages for them. Next. And one more. This is the last thing I'm going to cover, and then I will take questions. We asked people where they got their information about Lake Washington School District. Most people are getting their information from a variety of sources. We hear 2 or 3, or people were even mentioning 4 of these different items. But what's most important is, if you go to the next slide, the difference between where parents get their information and where people who are not parents get their information. On the left, we show where parents are getting their information about schools. They're getting it directly from the district. Parents are hearing direct communication, whether that is digitally or from mailers or from text messages or the district and school websites, or they're hearing from their teachers or principals. Also look at those numbers on top, 64%, 63%. That is, most parents, almost 2/3 of parents are getting that direct communication. On the right, we show where non-parents are hearing about the district. They're not hearing as directly from the districts. They're not hearing directly from schools. They're hearing from more public sources, TV, radio, and neighbors who are parents. They're hearing from newspapers, Seattle Times, more local papers. And these numbers overall are much lower than on the left, as in non-parents are not hearing as much. And this isn't a size, right? But not just, it's a helpful reminder. The people who are not directly connected to the district and don't have students in schools are hearing less about the district, and they're getting a lot of their information from TV and radio and newspapers. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So happy to take any questions about any of that. I know that was a lot of information, and thank you for sticking me.
And then, do you want me to leave the slide deck up? So if you have a question about a specific slide, we can go to it.
Anyone want to start? Mark?
We can hand that to Mark.
Pass the mic.
Thank you. Couple of questions. One, what was the date of the survey? When was it taken? Did I miss that?
It was mid-July.
Mid-July, thank you. I also noticed that when you broke down the demographics, you had a category called all other, as opposed to Sammamish being broken out. It seemed to be a bit odd having Kirkland broken out, Redmond broken out, and Sammamish not, especially considering the voting. So we say trends or bad trends, good trends from Sammamish. Now I can understand doing the same with the unincorporated areas, but Sammamish not being broken out. That's a tough one because that's the one that's the one that puts us over the top usually. Because we get a lot of support from Redmond, we get a lot of support from Kirkland, but if we don't get Sammamish, we don't get the 60%.
Do you want Ben to speak to?
Yeah, I'd love that, please.
Ben, did you hear that question?
I did, yes. And that's a good question. And the point is right on. I mean, we called it other, but you're probably right. It's basically just Sammamish and then whatever other small unincorporated areas are not included in are included in that grouping, which is why we didn't call it Sammamish immediately. I don't have the data pulled up offhand on how the numbers have changed in what's basically Sammamish region compared to 2014. So that's something we'd have to go back and look into. But I agree with you about the importance there and the importance of communicating this information and, to secure the support of, the entire district.
Yeah, I can understand the unincorporated not being as heavy of a consideration, but I'd really like to know how much of that percentage of all other was Sammamish. Also, I noticed when you looked at the importance of issues, I think that was the entire district category. Entire district. Oh, there we go. I didn't see anything on rating for diversity of staff. Now, am I just not seeing it because it's a subsection of number 1? Or not, and I'm not seeing race in number 1 either. I'm seeing older, pardon me, I'm seeing, as I recall, it was income, it was, I'm sorry, I don't recall the stratification of what composed the message on entire district. Can you go back a slide or two?
It was good.
Yeah, that part of it.
So this is where the what slide number?
No, you'll have to go, it's
There we go.
right.
That is
below
it.
the-
I'm sorry.
So
Regardless of abilities, backgrounds, or family's income, I assume that background is taking in race. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we worded this statement sort of in a more general way. So I think there are some people that are taking this to mean race, and others that are not. I think you probably could be more explicit that this is, if you're referring to race in this type of statement. We tried to keep it pretty high level, and this was. it's a short statement, and so there's only so much we can get in there.
Right. My thought is that backgrounds is kind of so amorphous. It could be families of second generation U.S. Versus U.S. for 10 generations.
Yeah.
It could mean the difference between Native American. To be quite frank, the definitions are probably endless. I think it needs a little bit tighter definition to be more meaningful.
Anyone else want to go first? Okay. Ben, one of the slides it showed a shift from 51% supporting a measure or supporting additional funding after receiving messaging. Yeah, right there you are. Is that 10% shift? I don't know. I would imagine it's fairly typical that once people receive positive messaging or something, you see that sort of shift. I mean, is that a typical shift you would see in a district similar to ours, or maybe even seen in our district before when we've done this before?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would actually say this is a little bit larger than what we see typically. I mean, we have seen 15-point shifts or 20-point shifts in a survey, but typically I would say we don't see even a 10-point shift. I mean, this is, I've seen districts where it doesn't change at all. You would think that presenting a lot of information that you would think makes the case for additional funding, that after that you'd get, a big change. But we many times we don't see that. So I would say a 10-point shift is substantial and is, beyond the ordinary.
And by that same token, I think when you went through the slide, you referenced that the definitely category does not shift at all after hearing additional messaging. What if anything can be read into that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I was surprised by that. Usually when we see a shift, a 10-point shift, we could also see that sort of intense block of, those tend to be parents, tends to be women. Those frankly tend to be people who are voting, those sort of more involved parent types who are sort of in that definite camp. We usually see that increase. So I don't know exactly what to attribute it to, frankly. But, the fact that we are seeing a lot of people saying the school probably need more funding, but not quite getting themselves to definitely, suggests to me that there's still some hesitation, some concern, or something holding people back. They hear all this information. They say, yeah, that's all compelling. I get it. I guess schools probably need more funding, but whatever it is, there's some doubt in their mind that is preventing them from going all the way to definitely. We don't know exactly what that is from this survey, but I agree that is meaningful.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's really helpful. Does anyone else have a question? I'm going to pass the mic.
Well, thank you for all the work you did with this survey. It went so fast. Could you please remind me how many people were surveyed overall?
401.
401. Yep.
And was that broken out by different demographics or just the 401 number?
Do we have the demographic breakout here in the slide deck? I don't believe we do.
I don't think we have it in the slide deck. I will tell you that it is representative on every demographic it can be of the adult population of the district. So we use census counts and a variety of other sources to ensure that the people we're speaking to are, when it comes to gender, race, educational attainment, region, zip code, everything is, as close as it can be to representative of the district.
So it would be helpful, John, if we could email the presentation, and I'm sure the community would like to see it listed on Board Docs so they have access to it. I guess others have already asked the rest of my questions, so I'll pass it on.
Yeah, so thanks for the poll. That was great to be able to see all this layout. So sort of a question I have is, as you spoke about as you were breaking out some of the demographics, I was intrigued by where you were looking at where there were some of the communication challenges potentially, or reaching out. It was different based on income as well as based on educational status. And so I'm just curious, from your experience of doing these other surveys in other locations, how that plays out in other places that you've seen. Is that a common finding that you find?
Yep, great question, and that is absolutely a common finding, especially on income, that it can be harder for school districts to reach those in lower income households, and that those in lower income households operate districts a bit lower in terms of how much they hear from them, in terms of the quality of schools, and in terms of the quality of teaching, the condition of facilities and buildings. So that is absolutely a common finding and a common challenge that I know school districts are working on and constantly trying to address, but something that we see or we pick up in polling a fair bit.
Also, as you went through this, the other question I had is you said Redmond had one of the biggest shifts in the perceptions, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Any reason as to why? Or hypothesis, I should say.
It's hard to know, frankly. It's we see that after hearing more information, like you said, there is a more substantive shift in Redmond than in other places, and sometimes these things can kind of line up with or be explained by other demographics, whether it's some other demographic information or frankly partisanship, which is not something we can ask or address in this survey. But that is often a variable sort of that behind some of these shifts that could explain it.
Great, thanks.
One last question for me. As we look at all parents, do you have in your materials, not in the slide deck, I know, but in the materials, how when you break out all parents, how they break out demographically, as far as race, as far as families with disabilities? I'm trying to think of other low-income families. My point is, if you've got X number of parents and non-parents, it seems like you almost need to have a breakout of how the other categories fit under those two major ones.
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have it in the slide deck, but certainly that there are demographic differences between parents and non-parents, right? I mean, obviously parents are generally within a certain age range, whereas the rest of the community has a much wider age range. I think if I recall correctly, there's some other demographic differences in terms of race and educational attainment among parents, how they differ from the overall electorate. And I believe parents are about a third of the entire community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you could do it so it's statistically, valid or worthwhile, to give us an idea of how the LWSD parents broke down, so we could get a feel for who's feeling, where our satisfaction is and where our dissatisfaction is, to be quite frankly, as opposed to all the non-parents. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ben? Yeah.
Hi, Ben, this is Siri. And so the other question, you had mentioned that these results were, in regards to how the school district is doing, and that was a much higher concept than what you've seen in other districts. Can you just expand on that and sort of what that means?
I apologize. I couldn't hear one or two words in what you said, but I think were the important ones.
So Ben, I'll just, early in the presentation, you stated that the results here were comparatively favorable to Lake Washington. Could you just talk about that in a little bit more detail and some of the things that maybe jumped out at you that were more favorable in Lake Washington compared to maybe some other districts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two numbers that jump out. The first one is the overall satisfaction. I think that was one of the first slides. In terms of having 71% satisfied, just 17% dissatisfied, we typically see, not as positive a ratio. Now, there's some districts that match these numbers for sure. This is not entirely unique, but this is certainly better than we've seen in many other districts. I think the second thing that jumped out to me was this slide that you're on right now with the job performance metrics. Some of these positive ratings at 60 to 70% are very, very good. And just as importantly, the poor ratings, the people are saying you're doing a poor job or the district is doing a poor job, these are very low. I mean, 4 to 5%, in a poll, you'd get 4 to 5% of people saying that the sky is green, right? Like to get only 4 or 5% saying poor is very impressive. So these numbers are good and even stronger among parents, which I think is important. We're not seeing, 25, 30% saying you're doing a poor job on taxpayer spending or, spending taxpayer dollars or preparing for future growth, which are difficult metrics to get a good rating on. So I thought this entire slide, the data points on this slide were out of the ordinary good.
Thank you.
Ben, do you want to talk about this slide at all?
He did at the beginning.
Back to Sherry's
Oh, hang on one second. Yeah, go ahead. Let's just follow up on that first. Anyone ask that again?
Ben, did you want to make any additional comments on this slide?
Sure. No, just that this is very good. I think. I mean, this is 71% satisfied to just 17% dissatisfied is very, very strong to negative ratio. So, in the 30% who say they're very satisfied, again, this is quite strong. And the improvement from 2014 is not something we always see also over a time frame like that. So that's encouraging.
Just one quick question on that slide itself. Our parents are always comparing us to North Shore, to Bellevue, to basically our neighbors, Issaquah. How do these, the 71% compare to those districts?
So I can't speak to specific numbers from specific other districts, but in terms of the general Puget Sound region, we have seen as high or higher, but I would say this is on the higher end of the range overall.
Great. Any last questions? Thanks, Ben.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
We appreciate you jumping on with us tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Have a good evening. Okay, let me jump.
I assume we have more
We do.
for the presentation time.
Okay, I didn't know if we were doing that. That was a break moment.
Okay. I'll just talk about next steps, and John, you're still gonna slides. You'll move
Yes.
the slides.
Yep.
Okay. So we just wanted to remind timeline. The board has seen these slides before. We're now in August, having our study session. We've been working since January. We've had multiple study sessions. We've had 2 bond and levy advisory committee meetings. July was when the community survey took place. That calendar, July is before June. So those need to be swapped because
Wow.
I don't know. That's like a COVID calendar.
I was just going
or
to say, I
something.
think COVID caused
COVID
it.
calendar, apologize. So yeah, July comes after June, and then we're now in August, and we're having our study session, and we'll have another study session on the 23rd. So, and then continuing on into the fall. Again, we'll have our study session in August, and then October is our goal to have the final bond and levy recommendations. Once the board makes those final recommendations, we a new thing this year for our levies. We go to OSPI for approval of the EP&O levy. That happens after the board action. The district begins providing information on the bond and levy. In November, we work on the voters pamphlet, update our websites, begin presentations. Oh, and I've doubled that to submit levy expenditure plan to OSPI. December 10th is the final date to submit resolution to the county, and then we continue presentations. We'll mail an informational ballot. PTA information presentations in January, and then election day is February 8th.
Do you have any information for the board around the OSPI approval process? Because this will be the first time our
Sure.
district has gone through
So
that.
what we can share, OSPI has a template. We are required to fill out kind of our expenditure plan. how we spend the levy by activity areas and by enrichment activity areas. So we can share that template with the board, and so you can see what we are able to submit. And OSBI commits to a week turnaround time, so that's their commitment. And so,
Okay.
yeah,
Can I ask a follow-up question?
absolutely.
What is OSPI reviewing the submittal for? And what is it compliance with the statute in terms of how much that we can ask for from voters? Is it how we're spending it?
Yeah, they
Both?
basically want to see that you have a plan for how, you know, what categories you're spending the dollars in.
Okay.
And so they are,
Are they scrutinizing how we're spending it? They want to see a plan? What?
Is it
It is
also
a
in
one
relation
page-
to the enrichment?
it is, yeah,
Okay.
so you're required to give them information
Okay.
on your spending plan by the enrichment categories.
Right.
They are, you know, looking at it to make sure, you know, what you say you're going to ask voters for matches your how you've broken out your expenditure plan. So they're not going to necessarily get into details that ask, okay, why are you spending 50 million on this category and 20 million on this category? They're not getting into that detail, but they want to make sure that the numbers add up and things like that.
And that
So-
we're spending the money in permitted ways.
Correct.
And so one of those permitted ways is special education
Correct.
as part of the
Yeah.
enrichment levy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great.
Yeah, so we'll share a draft, kind of the template, so you can see that ahead of time before we get that out. So,
So along that same line though, my understanding is through accounting, you have to, at this point, you're tracking how levy dollars are being spent currently.
correct, we are, in addition, we're required to, the accounting system was adjusted so that we are having to track which dollars are levy dollars versus state dollars. And so we've been doing that starting in the 2021 school year, and so that will continue.
So that's just starting in this upcoming school year?
It
Or
it started beginning this school year 2021, so 21, 22, it will continue. And
2021.
it's-
not
I know
20,
it's-
21.
2020,
Uh-huh.
21.
Okay.
Anyway.
It would be great to see that breakout at some point of
Yeah.
how those levy dollars were spent as we go through this process, so we can see how that's playing. That would be-
And what's interesting is we've always had on our, it's called the F-196, but the year-end financial report that we submit to the state has always had a section, even pre-McCleary, where we break down our expenditures by state, levy, federal, you know, or basically state, federal, other, and the other is essentially fees and levy dollars. So, but yes, we can share additional information on that.
Great.
I think the parents.
And we'll have that when we closer to when we close our books in October, because this is the first year we're reporting, so we'll have that actual information toward the end of October. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Alright.
Any other questions? Okay, so just reminding kind of the board and community connections that have happened to date so far. We had our study session on January 30th. We reviewed the timeline and the Facility Advisory Committee recommended projects. We had our additional study session April 24th. That was a whole day. Reviewed again the timeline, discussed the EP&O capital levy planning, and discussed kind of our facility planning. We had our bond and levy advisory committees in May and June, so a representative group of community members and staff members, and shared with them and received feedback on potential options. And then we met with the board on June 28th, continued to review EP&O capital levy and facility planning, conducted the community survey, and then again, here we are today having a study session, and then, today's study session, and then we'll have another study session on the 23rd.
One thing absent from that occurred over a year ago was the facility task force. Right?
Yes,
Went
and
through
so,
again.
yes.
I read, after our last meeting, I went back and read that report again. I recommend everyone do the same. We think about what the community wants for our facilities.
So yeah, 18 months of facility task force work, and the recommendations were presented in January, and then we shared that with the study session with the board as well in January.
Well, that was in January?
Pardon me?
It's in January. Okay, I was gonna say, I thought it was a year and a half ago, but okay, there you are.
It is when you think about how
Feels like
time changes, but it was in January, then the facility advisory committee made their final recommendations. It does feel like a lot longer. So.
And so, kind of in closing and in preparation for our next study session, so Barbara and I have been thoroughly going through the board's feedback to be responsive to the concepts and questions, because there were some conceptual questions that were asked that weren't just here's a data point to answer the question, but they were much broader than that. The reason that we felt we needed more time was because to truly give the time and detail to walk through not only the questions but the concepts, we felt like we needed a good duration of time in one sitting, so that we could actually get through that, so we can continue to narrow in on the board's collective interest, because ultimately the board will identify and adopt a resolution to put a measure 2 or 3 on the ballot. And that's a collective voice of the board. And so we want to provide the board with as much information because this is a unique point in time. It feels like this is a very different bond and levy cycle. It's the first EP&O levy since McCleary. We're in the midst of thinking about the long-term construction funding plan. I mean, those are two very substantial elements. The idea that we actually have an assessed valuation base where we could actually consider a long-term levy strategy is also something that's relatively new to us as a community and as an organization. So a lot of great questions have been asked, and trying to answer them in a succinct manner that makes sense to each of you is somewhat complex. But then also to think about, what do we want long term, the school district? In 50 years, none of us will be in these seats. Okay, I certainly hope I am not in this seat in 50 years. At 98 years old, I don't think that would be a good position. An honorary superintendent position. But in 50 years from now, what do we want? What decisions needed to have been made so that at that point in time, the infrastructure and facilities really match what we know our community wants, which is high quality facilities that provide the best education for their kids, that are community resources. Those are what we need to think about, and thinking about that long term will then help us come to some conclusions around what do we do today. And so excited about that conversation. In our work, we continue to go back to these values and the board's values, the value of aligning with our mission and vision. We have a rigorous mission and vision for kids. We know that our board, our community, our staff, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders value high quality education for our students. We know that is one of the pieces that makes this a great community, is the education that kids receive. We see that anytime there's reports about the community. People talk about the educational experience that kids have, and so we want to maintain that. We know that excellent schools are part of excellent communities. That's a value that we need to uphold and maintain. But we also have a value in just transparency, being clear about school funding processes and procedures and why we're making decisions. And so that's the work we continue to work through. And so kind of probably saying it just a little bit differently, but the same thing. This is a district that strives for excellence in accomplishing high goals and expectations for students' programming and outcomes. The district has ongoing maintenance, improvement, and opportunities in capital facilities and technology to support excellence and outcomes for students. And the district is rapidly growing, and a durable student capacity plan is required. And so that really does talk about the three different funding components: EP&O, capital projects, and a construction funding that we're thinking about. And what I continue to go back to is the expectation that the board has, the expectation that I have, is excellence for kids. And how we accomplish that in this is not a simple answer. And so that's why it's a valuable conversation. Siri, did you have a question? Oh, okay.
Oh.
Mark.
Just so you don't feel uninterrupted. I think when we look at these are the goals, the overall considerations, the one before that I can't remember the title of.
Yeah.
I think we need to make sure that equity is voiced throughout these. It probably works more in the values drive, but at the same time, I could see the top bullet on the next slide, equity belongs there too. Because I don't want anyone to think that equity only belongs in every policy. I don't want parents to get that perception of us, one thing. And if we're not careful, I think folks will think it's just the flavor of the month.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So that is what we have prepared for this evening. Are there any additional questions or comments as
Did I miss the slide that said when we would go out to the community and home?
So we can begin that, typically we begin that late November, December, all of January. So it's, we start that at the end of November and beginning of December.
And I know typically these are held in person, but are we going to consider some virtual options for people to hear the presentation?
we will have a variety of venues.
And I think we did do some, didn't we have, Shannon, a Teams Live or a Facebook Live session the last time during our 2019 construction levy? I think we did it. We did a Facebook Live Q&A session.
You know, I think we also have learned a lot over the last year around providing opportunity in multiple different ways and how our community responds to that. And so I think our virtual environment will be used very well for the informational campaign, because we know the reach is so great. You know, when you think about a parent needing to decide, do I get a babysitter or do I go to the school to hear a presentation about levy? After I've worked all day, and being able to be at home, it's on mute on your side so the kids can do whatever they want, but you can still receive that information. I mean, we just know that we heard from a lot of families that when they're able to do that and recording so that people can watch it on their timeline, all of those are beneficial. The other thing that Teams Live events allow for is the multiple languages. And so that's very, very, beneficial in that term as well.
Do you record those as well?
We do.
No, I myself have gone back and watched board meetings. I think it's a great value to everybody to be able to look up anything that you really want to.
No, I'm trying to point out the other point. It hits all parents, but especially our special needs parents, because they can't just call up the kid next door or down the street to get babysitters, and they often have to book them a month in advance.
Right.
So to just sort of follow up, knowing that we have the study session coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's a few things. one that I was appreciating listening here was basically we're speaking about universally designed learning and the approach of how we put the information out, multiple modalities and the components. So appreciate that thinking going through and the application of that, and it's fabulous. The other piece is if we can have that information, you mentioned the questions and concepts, and I know I sent a rather lengthy list of questions and concepts that I had. I don't know what else you received from anybody else. It would be interesting to be able to have that prior of sort of what are the key points. We'll be talking about that because when we touch on these in these short spurts of time, sometimes it's easier to have a period of time to digest at least what's coming.
Yes.
So if we have that information a little bit in advance, it would be beneficial.
So we have a document that we've started. We're calling it an FAQ, but I don't know if they're frequently asked questions, but that's what we titled it. And so
Q&A, I can change it.
so you can expect that on Thursday with briefs.
Oh, wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay, that would be helpful. If we have any further questions, continue to send those. as
Please
we
do.
go through. I think that the presentation here sort of brought up some additional questions that you might have in going forward with some of this and thinking about those different components. Because there is definitely conflicting information in there in many ways as you break through that up to where, so that's going to help the leads, I think, for that discussion will be about.
Anything else for the good of the order?
That is all we have.
Okay.
6:11.
Well, so we have a very packed agenda for the meeting tonight, so let's try to all be in there a little before 7 and start right on time so that we can get moving and not be here till 1 in the morning.
It does a full agenda.
Okay, there are no other items for the agenda. The August 9, 2021 study session is adjourned. And just a reminder for those watching at home, on August 23rd, the board will be meeting a study session at 1 p.m. to continue this discussion. Okay, thank you.